We're going to be focusing on the next holiday today. The next holiday is known colloquially as Sukkos or Sukkot. It has other names as well. And this period we're in right now, we are sandwiched in between Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and Sukkos or Sukkot. And it has its own significance because these are the 4 days of preparation for the holiday. And Judaism puts a lot of emphasis on preparation. Even though doing the mitzvah in the end is the most important thing, but we shouldn't minimize the importance of preparing for the mitzvah. The more effort we put in doing a mitzvah, the greater power the mitzvah has, and the greater merit accrues to us. The holiday of Sukkot has several names, 3 different names. In the Torah, the 2 names that are given are Chag HaSukkot, the festival of Sukkot. I'm going to alternate in pronunciation between Sukkot and Sukkot. Sukkot is the Ashkenazic pronunciation, which is the one I grew up with, and Sukkot is the Sephardic one, which is the one they use in Israel. But Sukkot or Sukkot, it's the same holiday. So the Torah refers to it as Chag HaSukkot, the festival of Sukkah. It only uses the plural. Sukkot is the plural of Sukkah. What is a Sukkah? We'll discuss a little bit later. And the other name that's given is Chag HaAsif, the festival of ingathering. Some people would translate it as the harvest festival. But I always was wondering whether the word harvest is the correct word. I looked up the word harvest in the dictionary, and it seems that there are 2 possible ways of translating it. One is the reaping of the crop, cutting the grain, collecting the vegetables from the gardens and so on. But that's not what asif means. Asif means ingathering. You see, in Israel, they would cut their grain in the spring and summer. The barley would be cut before Passover, and they would bring the first offering, the first crop of barley as an offering. Then a few weeks later would be the cutting of the wheat crop. But then, throughout the summer, they would take the fruits and produce and leave it outside for it to dry. And when would they bring it into the home? Before the rainy season would begin, which is now. That's the festival of Sukkot, is the time of the year when we start to expect the rain. So before the rain would come down and ruin the crops, they would bring it into the home. So throughout the summer, crops would stay outside. I don't know if all the crops or just some of them, but the summer especially was known for the fruit being dried in the heat of the sun and brought in during this period. And that's why it's called the festival of ingathering. This is when they would gather. So if that's what harvesting means, bringing it into the home, because I think in most societies they cut the grain and they bring it right in. But in Israel, apparently, there was a separation between the cutting and the actual bringing it into the home, the ingathering. So those are the 2 biblical names. In our liturgy, we refer to it as Zman Simchatenu, the season of our rejoicing. It's the season when we are rejoicing. And in the Talmud, this festival is simply called Chag, the festival. If it just says the word Chag, we have many festivals, it's referring specifically to this festival, which of course raises the question, why is this festival singled out from all the other festivals? Why is this festival unique? What makes it unique? Now, there are 3 pilgrimage festivals. What do we mean by pilgrimage? The Torah commands Jews living in Israel to go to Jerusalem, to the temple, 3 times a year during these 3 festivals, during Passover, during Shavuot, and during Sukkot. These are the 3 pilgrimage festivals where everyone would travel wherever they lived to the Holy Temple and bring offerings there and so on. And this was a time of rejoicing. So we actually have 3 biblical holidays that are designated for rejoicing. This excludes Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which have a different character. Those were not pilgrimage holidays, although I'm sure there were many people who would come to Jerusalem even for those holidays, but that was not mandated. Mandated was to come these 3 times. What is so special about these 3 times? They represent 3 different messages that we'll get into in a moment. But these are the holidays that are associated with agriculture. As I mentioned before, Passover was the time that they celebrated the barley crop. Barley was primarily used for animal feed, and if you can't feed your animals, they won't survive. So this was people were very grateful to God for this yield of barley. Then Shavuot was the time of the year when they would bring in the wheat grain. They would cut the grain, the wheat, which was mostly used for people, for humans. And Sukkot is when they would bring all the crops that were left outside back into the home. But there's also a spiritual dimension to all these 3 holidays. I mentioned many times that Maimonides says that there are 13 principles of faith, 13 things that a Jew has to believe in. Belief in God, that there's one God, that God communicates to us through the prophets. He gave us the Torah. Torah is immutable. And the reward and punishment, and the belief in the Messianic age, and so on. One of Maimonides' critics, known as the Ikarim, Rabbi Yosef Albo, says, if I could reduce 13 to 3, there are 3 major principles. One principle is that God is the creator. Well, if you say God is the creator, that implies that there is a God. That not just that God is the creator, but there obviously must be a God to be a creator. And that God is, how do we know that? How do we see God's power as to be the creator? You see that when he performs miracles. So Passover, he says, corresponds to God as the creator. That's the holiday that underscores and reinforces our belief in God as the master of the universe, because he's the creator of the universe. Shavuot is the day, the anniversary when God gave us the Torah. That presupposes the belief that God not only communicates to people, to this world in which we live. He's not just the creator of it, but he communicates with us, and he revealed to the world his purpose, why he created us. Why did he create this world? Is this world just an accident of evolution? God forbid. This is a world that was created by an intelligent designer, namely God, who had a purpose, and he revealed his purpose through giving us the Torah. Torah tells us what he wants us to do, how he wants us to live our lives. Then we have the holiday of Sukkot, in which we underscore God's providence, that he watches over us. Some people believe in God, but they say God created the world. He may have given the people of this world a message, what he wants them to do, and then he says, okay, you're on your own. I have other worlds to take care of. I have other business to take care of. I'm not interested in you anymore. No, God is interested in us. He watches over us. He protects us, and he challenges us, and he holds us accountable for our behavior. Good behavior begets good results, and evil behavior begets negative results. That's the third principle that's represented by the holiday of Sukkot. Because what is Sukkot? Sukkot is the holiday in which God protected us when we were in the desert for 40 years. So it's the holiday of protection, of providence. Those are the 3 holidays that represent these 3 different primary principles. Now, when we talk about the harvest, in terms of the ingathering, bringing the crops into the home, that's a physical phenomenon. But it also has a spiritual meaning. Very often, people have inspiration. Every time we pray, maybe not every time, but there are certain times when people feel inspired by something that happens in their life, by an incident that happens, by the prayers that they recite, by the study that they study. And what happens with most people is that the inspiration wears off. After a while, it wears off, it dissipates, and the inspiration is gone. So the inspiration, you could say, is something that happens outside of us, and we're just exposed to it. You watch a very powerful movie, you're exposed to that movie, it has an impact on you, but a day or two later, it's gone. So what we have to do in this holiday is to gather not just the crops. Crops are a physical representation of it, but we gather all the inspiration that was generated on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we incorporate it and integrate it into ourselves. We absorb that inspiration. That's the ingathering. Just like you gather crops into your home, if you keep the crops outside, you're not going to benefit from it. We also have to take the inspiration and bring it into our lives. And that's what this holiday is about. It's about gathering the inspiration of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that's the reason why it's such a happy time. Because as long as whatever inspiration you have is peripheral, is superficial, it's outside of us, and we're just basking in it for a while, it doesn't invigorate you as much, and you can't appreciate it as much, and you don't have the same amount of joy. More specifically, Sukkot celebrates Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, as I mentioned in the other class, is not a sad day. Just because we fast all day and we might not feel very comfortable, it's not sad. It's a day that we rise above the physical. And we become closer we're like angels, we become closer to God. And what is the purpose of Yom Kippur? As the name of the day itself indicates, it's a day of atonement. When we're elevated to a higher level, that cleanses us, and we're atoned for. Well, is that a reason to be happy or sad? That's a reason to be thrilled, to be ecstatic. That we have transformed ourselves, we have gotten rid of the negatives, we are forgiven, and we are now in a more spiritual state of being. So on Yom Kippur itself, we're focused on the prayers, we're focused on repentance, we're focused on confessing our sins, we're focused on getting rid of all the negatives, so we don't have time to really celebrate. And when Yom Kippur is over, we're tired from the fast. So God gave us a few days of rest, and then we celebrate. We throw a huge party, and that party is called the holiday of Sukkot. More specifically, and this goes into a little bit more of a deeper understanding of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur itself. On Rosh Hashanah, as we discussed in an earlier class, God decides what degree of relationship will He have with us. Whether or not we accept God and embrace God on Rosh Hashanah, God will still keep the world going, but it will be a world without any meaning and purpose. The macro world and the micro world. We could sleep through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we'll still be healthy and vibrant, and we'll still be able to get along with life. But it's going to be a very empty life, a very meaningless life, a very vacuous life. Rosh Hashanah is the day that we accept God as our King, and what that means in simple language is that we say, God, we want you to be connected to us. We want to have a relationship with you. And we focus on Rosh Hashanah, not on our sins, but on developing that relationship. We want you to enjoy being in our home. It's like you invite a guest into your home, and the guest feels very uncomfortable, very awkward. And then there's another home in which the guest comes in and the guest feels at home. Very often we tell people, feel at home. Well, some people mean it, actually, when they say it. Feel at home. You're welcome here. Just a little story. There was a man, a chassid, a follower of a very great rabbi, but his father was not interested in the Hasidic movement, and he didn't relate to that. And the son was trying to get his father to get closer to the Hasidic way of life. And finally he convinced him, could you come spend a Shabbat with my Rabbi, with my master? And he did, and it was very inspiring and everything, and the day was over. I'm making a long story short. And the son asked the father, no, were you impressed? Were you inspired? He said, yeah, it was nice, but it's not my cup of tea. So the son says, okay, there's one more thing I want you to come. Saturday night, it's customary to have another meal. If If you didn't get enough calories on Shabbat, you get it Saturday night. And that meal is a festive meal. I said, I'm going to invite my friends to this. To this. This is going to be held in someone's home, and all my friends are going to be there. So I want you to meet them. He comes into the home and he sees someone sitting at the head of the table. So he assumes that's the owner of the home. Then he sees someone else shouting out orders, do this, bring this. So that must be the master of the home. And then he kept on seeing, it's like everyone owned that home. And he never found out whose home it really was, because everyone felt it was their home. He says, that and convinced me to become a chassid. If people could be in someone else's home, and everyone feels at home, truly feels at home, and acts as they feel at home, that's the ultimate that a human being could reach in terms of relationships with other people. So if you want God to feel comfortable in your home, on Rosh Hashanah you say to God, God, we want you to be our king. We want you to feel comfortable in our home. And God accepts. He accepts the invitation, but we still have some problems, because if our house is not clean, God is not going to feel comfortable. So we go through 10 days of repentance, of return. On Yom Kippur, we cleanse ourselves. It's not so much about asking God for forgiveness for sins because we feel this guilt, although a little guilt doesn't harm you. Too much guilt is harmful. But the purpose is, if we're having a relationship, how could we not have a clean house? How could we not have a clean personality? So we get rid of all the things that distract us from God feeling comfortable in our home. And once God feels comfortable in our home, we bring God into our lives, into our homes, into our world. We first appreciate that. We first experience that relationship on the holiday of Sukkot. Sukkot is like the wedding. It's like, actually Yom Kippur is the wedding. And after a Jewish wedding, you have 7 days of celebration. That's what Sukkot is, the 7 days of celebration, experiencing the wedding and the relationship that was achieved on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So Sukkot is really the culmination of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They're not separate holidays. They're just two sides of the same coin. One side is creating the relationship, and the other one is celebrating the relationship. You can't have one without the other. If there's no relationship, there's nothing to celebrate. If there's a good relationship, you will automatically want to celebrate, and that's what Sukkot is. Rosh Hashanah is the only holiday, biblical holiday, that occurs on the beginning of the month. Passover is the 15th of the month. Sukkot is the 15th of the month. And even rabbinic holidays, Purim is the 14th and 15th of the month. Hanukkah is at the end of the month. The only holiday that is actually the beginning of the month is Rosh Hashanah. And in the book of Psalms, it refers to Rosh Hashanah, it alludes to Rosh Hashanah by referring to it as Bekesa. Bekesa, one translation of the word is concealed. When do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah? When the moon is concealed, because a lunar month, Judaism follows the lunar calendar. A lunar month means a day in which the lunar new beginning of the month, Rosh Chodesh as it's called, is the day when we don't see the moon. The moon is just born then. The moon is hidden. The moon is there, but it's hidden. And that's what Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a time when the spiritual energies that we generate are hidden. They're not palpable. They're not, you can't feel them. When do they become fully developed? On the 15th of the month, when the moon is full. That's when Sukkot occurs. On the 15th of the month. That answers the question why Sukkot is more joyous than all other holidays. All holidays are joyous times, Passover, Shavuot, but Sukkot is the only holiday in which we actually refer to it as the season of our rejoicing. It's the most joyous of all the biblical holidays. Why is it the most joyous? Because it's the celebration of that wedding. There's no greater celebration in Judaism than a celebration of a wedding, and it's when you internalize all the inspiration. It's something that becomes part of you. This is the greatest source of joy and celebration. How do we represent all of these powerful concepts that occur in the holiday of Sukkot through the Sukkah. The Sukkah is the central theme. The holiday is named the Festival of Sukkot. What is the Sukkah? The Sukkah is a temporary structure. The walls could be permanent, but the covering, called the schach, has to be made out of plants. You can't use metal. You can't use anything that does not grow from the ground. It has to be detached from the ground. You can't just use, let's say you have a big tree overhead. You have to cut the branches off. You can't just use the tree. The plants cannot be transformed into something, any type of utensil. You can't use wooden pots and pans, wooden whatever. It has to be raw material. So most people nowadays use bamboo mats. That's the current usage. Bamboo poles or bamboo mats. You could use pine. You could use any type of plants. If you have a lot of growth in your backyard, you can just cut it and use it for your sukkah. But the point is that it's a temporary dwelling place. And during this holiday of Sukkot, we leave our homes, as it were, in terms of eating our meals and even sleeping in the sukkah, although there are many who do not sleep in the sukkah for reasons we won't go into right now. Sometimes it could be living in Buffalo might be a good reason not to sleep in the sukkah. So, at least certainly not when we had the October surprise. It was not advisable at that point. But the idea is that we turn our home from our permanent structure into the temporary structure. Why do we dwell in sukkahs during this festival? What's the reason for it? So the Torah tells us that when God took us out of Egypt, we were in the desert. We didn't have any homes. So God settled us in homes. What exactly does that mean? There were two opinions in the Talmud. You have the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer and the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, the two greatest sages of that time. Rabbi Eliezer says that the booths, the sukkahs that we had then, we're not referring to actual sukkahs the way we have. There was a virtual sukkah. There were clouds of glory, the Torah describes, that surrounded the Jewish people when they were in the desert. And these were miraculous clouds. They were not just clouds. Some of the things the clouds did. Number one, the clouds protected them from their enemies. If the enemy would shoot an arrow, the clouds would deflect the arrows. So it protected them from any harm from the outside. The clouds also were weather control system. It gave them the right temperature. In the summer, it was air conditioning. In the winter, it was heat. They had climate control throughout the 40 years. They didn't have to worry about climate. Another thing that clouds of glory were told accomplished, it leveled all the ground. All the mountains were leveled, except for Mount Sinai and the two mountains on which Aaron and Moses were buried. But all the other mountains were leveled, so they didn't have to climb up hills and go down hills. Clouds of glory took away all that trouble that they would have to endure if they hadn't.
The cloud was all year long or just on Sukkot?
No, all year round. 40 years straight. 40 years straight. It also laundered their clothing. It was the first dry cleaners. You didn't have to send your laundry to the Chinese laundry. Reminds me of a joke. Once a Chinese man and a Jew were arguing who came first, the Jews or the Chinese, and the Jew said, "We came first." Chinese said, "No, we came first." So the Chinese guy says to the Jew, if you were around without us, where did you go to eat? Well, they could have said the same thing. Where did you do your laundry? So no, we had the clouds of glory, so we didn't have to worry. We didn't need Chinese at that point. But anyhow, it laundered our clothing. Another miracle that happened, there were no department stores to buy new clothing. Their clothing grew with them. As they grew, the clothing grew with them. So they had fresh clothing, laundered clothing. And it killed all the snakes and scorpions that would have harmed them. It performed many, many different miracles. So to commemorate those miracles that we experienced in the desert, when God took us out of Egypt, we dwell in the sukkah in a model alluding to these clouds of glory. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva says, no, it means actual booths. We actually had booths in which to dwell while we were in the desert for 40 years. What's the difference between, both opinions are true. What's the difference between them? The difference between them is when we're thanking God for something, should we put the focus on the miracles? Miracles don't happen all the time. We don't expect miracles all the time. When a miracle happens, we're grateful for it. So Rabbi Eliezer says we should focus on the miracles because they're out of the ordinary. They're supernatural. They're something that is so unique that we have to be mindful of it and express our gratitude to God for that. Rabbi Akiva says, no, we have to put the focus on the normative, on the natural. Sometimes people forget that God is not just responsible for the miracles. When someone was very ill, God forbid, and they recover, and they say, oh, thank God I recovered. But what about when you were healthy? Where was the thank God when you were healthy? And when you were healthy, it's also God keeping you healthy. All the natural things are just as much from God as the miraculous things, as the major changes in the world. So we do both. When we sit in the Sukkah, we think of the fact that God took us out of Egypt miraculously and provided us with these clouds of glory, and He also provided us with sustenance for 40 years in the desert. Question is asked, if Sukkot is to commemorate the Exodus and what happened after the Exodus, we should have celebrated Sukkot right after Passover. Passover is when we left Egypt, and Sukkot is when we were in the desert. So the classic answer to that is that what do people do in the Middle East, in warm climates, when the spring comes? Spring comes, everyone goes out of their homes and they build temporary dwellings. They have exposed to the outside, to the elements, because it's beautiful. The spring is beautiful in Israel. That's normal. No one would take note of the fact that we're doing something different. When the summer is over in Israel, that's when the rain starts. Which person starts to go outside when they're expecting rain, when it's starting to get cold? So we do that precisely when the season changes, and it's not normal and natural for us to go into a booth outside with a flimsy covering and exposed to the elements, more or less. Precisely at that time, we go out to show that we're doing this not for leisure, not for comfort, not as a vacation, not as a diversion from our normal routine. We're doing it because we're grateful to God for these miracles. There are many different symbolisms in the Sukkah. One symbolism is about the frailty, the fragility of life itself. How we are so fragile, just like the Sukkah is so frail. Any big wind could come and knock it out. This October surprise is a good example. Our Sukkah was totally destroyed on that October surprise, and we had to take whatever was left and we turned it into a tiny Sukkah that could fit one or two people. And who knows how many people didn't have a Sukkah because of it. It's a fragile structure. Well, our whole existence as individuals is so fragile. We take life for granted so many times. We think, well, I'm a young person, I'm healthy, everything is fine. Why should I think twice about it? Young people are also subject to all sorts of crazy things happening. We depend on God's protection every day, every moment of the day. With every breath that we take, we have to thank God, the psalmist tells us. So the Sukkah represents the frailty of our existence, but also of our national existence. Look how many times Jewish people could have been erased from existence. It's not just Haman who had a plot that was close to succeeding, of annihilating every man, woman, and child, but throughout our history we were massacred by the tens of thousands throughout history, by the millions even. In fact, you don't even have to go to the Holocaust. The Romans murdered close to 2 million Jews during the time that the Second Temple was destroyed. I don't know how many Jews lost their lives at the time of the First Temple was destroyed, but certainly hundreds of thousands. The Crusades killed thousands of Jews. The Cossacks in the 17th century murdered, the estimates are up to several hundred thousand. The Germans in the 13th century, tens of thousands of Jews were massacred. The pogroms in Russia during the turn of the 20th century, tens of thousands of Jews were murdered. The Holocaust was just so unprecedented that people forget about all the massacres before the Holocaust. And yet we survived and flourished and rebuilt ourselves. But in every generation, we say this at the Haggadah of Passover, they try to destroy us and God saves us from them. The Sukkah reminds us of how frail our existence is without God's protection. But there's a more positive, not that that's not positive, but there's a more powerful expression of the Sukkah. As I mentioned before, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we're inviting God. And we're saying to God, God, we want you to be our king. God, we want you to forgive us. We promise to live our lives in a better way than we did before. And God's response to us is by embracing us. The Sukkah is the embrace, is the divine, eternal embrace, where God says, I love you and I am taking you into my hands, into my embrace. And there's something unique about the Sukkah. The Sukkah is the only mitzvah that we do in which the totality of the person is in this mitzvah. You put on tefillin, the tefillin go on the arm, they go on the head. So they wrap around your arm and they wrap around your head. You wear a talit, you wrap yourself in a talit, but it's not your totality. Every mitzvah we do involves some part of our anatomy. You give tzedakah, it involves your hand. You're giving a coin to a poor person, it involves your hand, your arm. Sukkah, your total body is in the sukkah. Not just your body, but also your clothing, and even your boots. Even your boots go into the sukkah. Every part of you is enveloped. There's no other mitzvah that has that power. So someone asked, but then there's another mitzvah, the mikvah. The mikvah that we immerse ourselves in is totally enveloping. When you go into the mikvah, you have to make sure that not even one hair sticks out of the water, or else the purification is not complete.
Yeah, but you don't have clothes in the mikvah.
Oh. But there are at least two differences. One difference is you don't go in with your clothing.
Or your boots.
Certainly not your boots. But the second difference is, how long could you stay in the mikveh? Unless you have an oxygen tank, which is not recommended. You're there for a few seconds, and then you go out. The sukkah, you're there for hours and hours. You can even live there 24/7. So it is a much more all-encompassing mitzvah. It just totally envelops you. It's completely, totally enveloping. No part of you is left out of it. And that's a very powerful thing. You're in God's home, in His embrace, but the totality of you. There's no part left out. In a relationship, there's nothing greater in a relationship than the one who relates to you, relates to your totality. Sometimes we accept someone, we say, I like that person's mind, but I don't like that person's heart. I like their heart, but I don't like their hands. I don't like different parts of them. I'll accept them because there's some part of them is good. You want a real relationship is where you accept the totality of the person.
I thought of another distinction, what our friend said. Mikvah is, once you do what you have to do, I don't really get more schar for being there another 5 minutes, but sukkah, for every minute you're there, or every second you're there, you get additional.
Okay, you're saying that the mikveh, once you do your dipping, you don't have to stay there.
Make place for somebody else. The sukkah, the fact, every minute.
Right, and also in the mikveh, you don't invite others into the mikveh with you. In the sukkah, you invite others into it as well. There are a lot of differences. Before I just want to mention one other thing. And I'll go back to the sukkah. One of the other things that we do in this holiday is we recite a blessing over 4 species of plants. The lulav is the palm branch. The etrog is the lemon-like citrus fruit. We tie myrtle leaves called hadassim to the lulav, and willows called aravos to the lulav. And we take the lulav in our right hand, if you're right-handed, and the lulav has now 3 species on it, the palm branch, the willows, and the myrtles. You take the etrog, the lemon-like fruit, and you put them together. There's a blessing you recite. And we do this for 7 days. Every day we do it for the 7 days of the holiday. Next Wednesday, we're going to have a class in the Sukkah, God willing, if it doesn't rain. And or snow. Right, in Buffalo you have to add that.
I saw the weather report. The whole week's supposed to be nice.
Okay, so we'll have the class in the Sukkah here. So we'll talk more about the 4 kinds. I just wanted to mention it so people should be ready to fulfill this mitzvah every day. We're going to be around, so whatever, we'll offer people the opportunity to do it.
We don't do lulav and esrog on Shabbat.
Except Shabbat.
Right, the only day we don't do it is on Shabbat itself. The first day we will not do it. But the Sukkah is even the first day. Now, I just wanted to conclude with another thing about the Sukkah. There's a expression in the book of Isaiah that in the future God will create for us a Sukkah that will protect us from the rain and the stream of water. So the Rebbe's father once explained, how many commandments do we have in the Torah?
613.
Okay, how many of them are positive? Do's, things that we're supposed to do? 2, very good. It says over here, yes, it says. 248. Now, what happens if someone says, I don't want to do 248, I want to do 247? The Torah says, no, you can't subtract, you can't take off any mitzvah. What if someone says, I want to do 249? You can't do that either. Why can't you do 249? 247, okay, you're subtracting, but why can't you add? So there's a famous parable given by a master of parables. He was known as the Dubna Magid. It's a very cute parable. A man moves into town, and he knocks on the door of his neighbor, and he says, could you do me a favor? I need a silver spoon. Could you lend me a silver spoon? Sure, why not? The next day he comes back with a silver spoon and a little silver spoon. And the man says, well, I only lent you 1 spoon. He says, yes, but this one had a baby. I think the guy's a little cuckoo, but, I'm not going to say no to another silver spoon. A week later he comes and he asks him for a silver platter. So he says, sure, you can borrow it. And he comes back with a little silver platter in addition to the big one. Then he comes a week later and says, can I borrow your expensive chandelier? He says, wow, I'm going to get a little chandelier as well. A week goes by, he doesn't return it. A month goes by. So finally, the guy goes to him and he knocks on the door. He says, what happened to the chandelier? He says, I felt so terrible, I didn't want to tell you, it passed away. He says, are you crazy? A chandelier passing away? He says, well, if a spoon could have a baby and if a platter could have a baby, then a chandelier could pass away. He says, that's the reason why you shouldn't add on any commandments. Because if you start thinking you can add on, one day you'll add on, the next day you'll say, you know what, if I could add on, I'm the boss. I'll subtract as well. Well, the Hebrew word for rain is matar. It adds up to 249. The Hebrew word for stream, a stream of water, zerem, is 247. The sukkah is there to protect you from 249 and 247. And the Rebbe's father then said, the word sukkah, if you spell it phonetically, that means the letter samach is the first letter, you spell it as you pronounce it, samach mem chaf, it adds up to 248. The sukkah...
Where do you get mem?
What?
Mem?
Samach is samach mem chaf, that's 120. The vav is vav aleph vav, that's 13. The chaf is chaf fei, that's 100. The hey is hey yud, that's 15. If you add that up, it's 248. I tried it before I came here, just to make sure I got it right. So the sukkah represents the 248, and also the Talmud says that there are 248 bones in the body. And the Talmud actually, the Mishnah actually enumerates all the 248 bones. And it's interesting that in anatomy they tell you there's fewer than 248. So a doctor who did research in this recognized that at a certain age, the bones, which start off as ligaments, cartilage, they fuse when you get older, but at a certain point, within a few years, you have 248, then it gets less. But anyhow, 248 represents the totality of the person. When you go into the sukkah, you go in with the totality of your person, and you're going into God's home. When you're in someone else's home, you don't change the rules. In your own home, you can make the rules, but in someone else's home, you can't say, you're doing this is your recipe. I think we should add a few more spices here and there. No, it's not your home. Don't add spices to the recipe. Let the chef, the homeowner, decide what the recipe will be. Don't subtract and don't add. When you go into God's sukkah, you recognize that the mitzvahs that I do, you see, there are two attitudes to doing a mitzvah. One attitude is, this is how I feel. I feel inspired. I feel I want to do something good. That's wonderful. That's beautiful. But then, if it's all about you, you're going to start to change things. And at a certain point, you're going to offend the person who you think you're very nice to, because it's all about you, how you feel. It's like, if you want to give someone a gift, what's the ideal type of gift? Something that you know the person needs or would want. Now, giving a gift, any gift, is a nice gesture, and I'm not saying you can't give a gift even if you don't know what the person wants. A gift is a gesture. But the ultimate gift is when you say, I want to give something that person would really appreciate, even though I don't like it, but the person likes it. If you want to serve someone ice cream, do you want to just give them ice cream? You want them to the flavor that they like. That's what the ultimate mitzvah is. That's Sukkah represents. I'm in God's home. I want to do it His way. I want to please Him and not please myself. You automatically please yourself when you please God, but that's not the goal. That's not the objective. The objective is to do what God wants, and that translates in our human relationships as well, that we start to think about what can we do for the other rather than what can we do for ourselves, and using the other as a gimmick to do things for ourselves. So that's one of the powerful messages of the Sukkah. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you said about not adding onto the mitzvahs, is that why Chabad doesn't decorate the Sukkah?
No. You're not allowed to add. Maimonides asked the question, how come we have so many additions that the rabbis added on? But they never said it's a biblical commandment. You could add, you could enhance something that you're doing. You can make something more beautiful. So that's why people decorate sukkahs, to make it more beautiful. So the question is, how come Chabad's custom is not to decorate the sukkah? Okay, that's a 10-minute discussion. If you remind me next Wednesday, I'll answer it.
And part two of my question. When I go in the sukkah, if I just want to make a bracha and eat one bite and go back in my house and eat the meal, that's the same mitzvah? Or you really have to stay in the sukkah?
Yeah, unless it's raining.
Unless it's raining?
Right.
If it's cold?
Depends how cold. There's a secret remedy for cold. It's called a coat. And a fur coat is even better.
My father was a furrier.
Okay, you have the answer. It's when it gets very hot and you're outside, that's a little bit more of a problem. The Floridians, I think, have a hard time with their sukkahs. Although you can probably put some air conditioning in the sukkah. It's not very...
They have fans.
Yeah, you could do that.
Split units in Florida.
Like, we could have heat.
Yeah.
Heater for the winter, yeah.
Any questions on the Zoomers? The Zoomites? The Zoomers? Okay, everyone, have a good day, a good week, and a Chag Sameach, a happy and inspiring holiday Sukkot.